When Peter Sauber founded Sauber Motorsport in 1970, it produced not Formula One cars, but sports cars instead, starting with Peter building the C1 in his parents' garage, with the letter C in each Sauber car designation standing for the name of his wife, Christiane. The Sauber name gradually became a mainstay of sports car racing, taking part in the World Sports Car Championship, a predecessor to the current World Endurance Championship. Sauber would gain a partnership with Mercedes-Benz, who would supply engines for the Sauber C8, eventually culminating in the machine you're seeing here, the legendary Sauber Mercedes C9. Introduced at the 1987 1000 kilometers of Silverstone, it wasn't initially the most reliable of car, but that would change in the 1988 season when the C9 started to come into its own, picking up its first wins and fighting for the championship title, finishing second in the Sports Car Manufacturers Championship. It would go one better in 1989, winning the championship outright, taking 7 victories out of 8 races, not to mention overall victory at the 1989 24 Hours of Le Mans, proving to be one of the fastest cars to ever go down the Mulsanne Straight before the straight received the chicanes in 1990. The C9 would see one final victory for the first round of the 1990 Sports Car Championship before being replaced by its successor, the Sauber Mercedes C11, and the 1990 sports car season would also prove to be dominated by Sauber Mercedes. 1991, however, was the first chink in the armour, as the C11's own successor, the 3.5 litre flat 12 powered C291, proved to be so unreliable that it single-handedly killed the Sauber sports car program. But that wasn't the end of Sauber, as we know, because Sauber and Mercedes were already planning to pull out of sports car racing in the first place. They were aiming for a start in 1993 in the Formula One World Championship. Peter Sauber would run the team as a semi-successful midfield outfit until it was purchased by BMW in 2006, where they took the team's so far only Formula One race victory. It's a chapter of Sauber's history that is sadly underrepresented in racing video games. Following the 2008 financial crisis, the Sauber name almost completely disappeared from Formula One, when BMW unceremoniously sold the team back to its founder at the end of 2009. At the time, all 13 team slots available for the 2010 season had been filled, and it looked like that Sauber might be out for good. But when Toyota also confirmed their withdrawal from Formula One, it provided Sauber with a lifeline. So late was this sale that the team had to legally compete in the 2010 season as BMW Sauber, even though there was no longer any BMW components in the car. The brand new Ferrari-powered C29 would be almost entirely sponsorless and would take on 2 new drivers. Former McLaren test driver Pedro de la Rosa who would end up being dropped in the second half of the season for former Sauber driver Nick Heidfeld, and promising Japanese driver Kamui Kobayashi. The first half of the season would be very poor for Sauber, with reliability being a major sticking point, with the car failing to finish more often than not. These reliability issues would eventually be largely ironed out, but the damage was done nonetheless, and Sauber's season would be compromised, even as the car became somewhat more competitive in the second half of the season. The vast majority of the car's 44 points would be scored by Kobayashi, with De La Rosa only scoring 1 7th place before his replacement by Heidfeld, who could only go on to score 6 more points for the team. Whilst the C29 did eventually evolve into a semi-regular point scorer, it wasn't enough to elevate the Sauber any higher than 8th in the Constructors' Championship. But considering where the team was at the start of the season, potentially not even securing a spot on the grid, I think the team would have been happy with 8th. Entered into the 2011 Formula One season, the Sauber C30 began the season well, finishing 7th and 8th in the season opening round in Australia. Unfortunately, however, the rear wing of the car did not conform to the regulations, and thus both cars were disqualified. An embarrassing start to the season for Sauber, and an embarrassing start to the career of Sergio Perez, who had replaced Nick Heidfeld. It would have been the best result of the season for Sauber, who would only go on to score 1 double points finish in the remainder of the season at the Spanish Grand Prix. The C30 was at least much more reliable than the preceding C29, with points coming more frequently in the first half of the season as a result, with Kobayashi going on to score the car's single best result with a 5th place at the Monaco Grand Prix. However, in the same event, Sergio Perez would suffer a massive accident, which put him out of action for the next 2 Grand Prix weekends. The car's performance began to drop off at the Canadian Grand Prix, when Kobayashi would score 7th place, his last good result of the season. Perez would go on to score 7th at the British Grand Prix, his best result of the season as well, but after that, each driver would only score 3 more times for the rest of the season. Kobayashi himself would go on a 7-race pointless streak between the German and Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. This drop-off in the C30's performance, after a relatively decent start to the season, ultimately meant that the team could only score a grand total of 44 points, the exact same number of points they scored in 2010. This time, however, it was enough for 7th place in the Constructors' Championship. This was as a result of Williams falling down the order, something we'll get to when Williams get their turn. Whilst 2011 was an improvement for Sauber, relatively speaking, the team still had a long way to go if they were to ever reclaim that race-winning form they'd had in 2008, something which to date they still haven't achieved. But if they could at least stand on the podium, that would be quite the achievement. Sauber retained their 2011 driver lineup of Kamui Kobayashi and Sergio Perez for 2012 to pilot the C31. The year started exceptionally well for the team, with a double points finish in the season opener in Australia, and Checo Perez picking up his inaugural podium at the second round in Malaysia, his first podium in his career, and Sauber's first since they were still BMW Sauber in 2009. It was an exceptional race for Checo, who found himself in contention for the race victory, ultimately missing out due to a mistake. It was a great result for Checo and the team, though Checo would then go on a 4-race pointless streak before scoring again with yet another podium in Canada. A third podium for Checo would follow at the Italian Grand Prix, matching his season best of second. Kobayashi would end his podium drought as well, scoring a sensational third place at his home Grand Prix of Japan, the only podium of his Formula One career. To date, Kobayashi is the most recent Japanese driver to stand on a Formula One podium, and only the second at the Japanese Grand Prix. The Sauber C31 was a reasonably competitive car, pretty rapid in the races, if inconsistent, especially when in qualifying trim. Inconsistent its pace may have been, the Sauber C31 was still fast enough to gain the team a few more sponsors, such as Chelsea Football Club and Oerlikon, whose name is better associated with 20mm anti-aircraft guns, of all things. It may have not been shooting down any kamikazes, but it did help Sauber shoot up the championship order, helping the team score 126 points on their way to 6th place in the World Constructors' Championship. A decent result, and a sign that the team was getting better. The Sauber C31 would be the last Sauber to stand on the Formula One podium for 13 years. Sauber entered the 2013 Formula One season with a completely new driver lineup, with German driver Nico Hülkenberg and Mexican Esteban Gutierrez replacing his fellow Mexican Checo Perez. This lineup proved to be completely lopsided, as he would go on to score all but 6 of the team's points that season. A stat that might sound impressive, but it wasn't, if we're being totally honest. The gunmetal grey Sauber C32 was a marked regression in performance compared to its predecessor, as Hülkenberg and Gutierrez could only manage to drag 57 points out of the car, which in the end would only be enough for 7th place in the Constructors' Championship. All but 7 of those points came after the summer break, when the pace of the car improved thanks to a few upgrades, but the car was still not entirely consistent. Nico managed to start the Italian Grand Prix on the 2nd row in 3rd place, but by the end of the race he was down in 5th. It's still a respectable result, but not the 3rd he had started with, a finishing position that would continue to elude the German for a number of years. Following the upgrades in the second half of the season, the C32 managed a best finish of P4 at the Korean Grand Prix, whilst Gutierrez would score his only points of the season at the Japanese Grand Prix, with Nico finishing in just ahead in 6th. It begs the question, where would Sauber have finished the 2013 season if they'd had a competent driver in the second car? If they'd been at least as good as Nico, then the team could have been fighting for 5th place in the Constructors. Alas, all they could manage was 7th. The team's progress had stalled and was now regressing, and things could only get worse. Marking Sauber's first ever turbocharged Formula One car, the C33 was Sauber's car for the 2014 Formula One season, driven by Esteban Gutierrez, who had been retained from the previous season, and Adrian Sutil. It wasn't the only first that the C33 had. It had the unfortunate distinction of being the first, and to date only, Sauber Formula One car to go pointless for the entire season. 0 points scored over 19 races. Truly embarrassing. It is perhaps Sauber's worst ever Formula One season in terms of performance, perhaps only beaten by the 2024 season. But we'll get to that later on. The C33 struggled with weight issues across the season, issues that were so fundamental that Sutil, who was already tall and heavy for a Formula One driver, fasted for 2 days straight before the season opener in a desperate attempt to gain some performance out of the car. This, coupled with a lackluster Ferrari power unit, meant that the Sauber was one of the least competitive cars on the grid. The best result that the car managed to achieve were 2 11th places at the hands of Sutil at the Australian and Hungarian Grand Prix, whilst Gutierrez could only manage to finish a best of 12th in Australia. These 2 11th places would mean that Sauber would at least finish ahead of the struggling Minnow Caterham, who managed just 1 11th place, meaning that Sauber would end the season in 10th in the Constructors' Championship, meaning they at least got a cut of the prize money, and Caterham, gaining nothing, would fold. Regardless, this began a long period of financial difficulties for the team, and thus, feeling as if they had no other way, the team dropped its existing driver lineup in favour of 2 pay drivers for 2015. Sauber's 2015 season started off alright, with the team picking up a double points finish at the season opening round in Australia, with Felipe Nasr finishing 5th ahead of Marcus Ericsson in 8th. This would ultimately prove to be the best result that the team managed all season, with points petering out as the season went on, with only one other double points finish at the Chinese Grand Prix. Ericsson proved to be the weaker of the 2 drivers, routinely finishing behind his less experienced teammate Nasr, the Brazilian ultimately contributing the majority of the team's 36 points that season, which would be more than enough to help them on their way to 8th place in the Constructors' Championship, a much needed improvement over their previous campaign. Whilst Sauber's trackside operations are going fairly well, things back home in Switzerland were not going quite so well, as at one point Sauber had 3 drivers contracted to drive for the team. Sauber had initially contracted Gado Vandergaard to drive for them in 2015, but then they breached his contract by signing Ericsson and Nasr instead. The subsequent legal proceedings drained Sauber of at least $16 million, further straining the team's financial difficulties and causing some of the team's higher-ups to gain a bit of a grudge towards Felipe Nasr, as if it was his fault somehow. These further financial difficulties meant that Sauber couldn't fit as many upgrades to the C34 as they would have liked, and its performance petered off as the season went on. Nasr would score his final points of the season with a 9th place finish at the USA Grand Prix, whilst Ericsson would pick up his final points of the season and the next 2.5 years at the Italian Grand Prix, also with a 9th place. Despite its relative lack of competitiveness, it still managed to score frequently enough to outscore the struggling McLaren Honda outfit, finishing just 9 points ahead of the Woking team. Despite the 8th place finish and the prize money that came with it, the financial difficulties of the team were now at their absolute worst, and Sauber could no longer afford to use their wind tunnel. With Sauber deep in financial difficulties, the team opted to make the new C35 for 2016 very similar to the preceding C34. It made sense after all, it was the last year of the regulation cycle and it would be all change for 2017. However, if Sauber had been hoping that retaining the C34's design for another year would help with competitiveness, they were sorely mistaken. The C35 was one of the least competitive cars to roll out of Sauber's factory in Hinwil. The C35 was alarmingly slow, but at least it was faster than the rival Manor MRT 05. By the time the Formula One circus arrived at the Austrian Grand Prix, Sauber was ahead of Manor in 10th place at the Constructors' Championship, courtesy of a handful of 12th place finishes that Manor had not been able to replicate. But that weekend would prove to be a disaster for Sauber, as the Manor of Pascal Wehrlein managed to finish the Grand Prix in 10th position, giving his team a crucial point and that coveted 10th place in the Constructors, meaning that if Manor finished the season in that position, they would get a cut of the prize money and Sauber would get nothing. As the end of the season loomed, it looked as though Sauber's 2016 season would overshadow their 2014 season as the worst in their history. But just as all was looking lost, Felipe Nasr pulled one out of the bag and managed to finish P9 in his home Brazilian Grand Prix, giving Sauber 2 points, one more than Manor, and thus securing 10th place in the Constructors' Championship at the 11th hour. This 1 point deficit proved impossible for Manor to overhaul in the one round remaining, and thus they finished the season dead last, resulting in the collapse of their team. As for Sauber, in addition to their prize money, the team received further financial security when it was bought out by Longbow Finance. As for Felipe Nasr, he would be promptly awarded for his efforts by being dropped by the team for the next season. Despite the mid-season takeover by Longbow Finance the previous year, Sauber's 2017 car, the C36, was again designed without the aid of the wind tunnel and was intentionally designed to use the year-old specification Ferrari engine instead of the up-to-date one, presumably due to the financial difficulties that the team was going through at the time the car was designed. As such, the C36 was yet again another backmarker spec car, being underpowered, draggy, and just generally slow. Despite the obvious issues with the C36 and the fact that one of its drivers was completely useless, Sauber would actually find themselves ahead of McLaren in the Constructors' Championship, courtesy of the McLaren Honda outfit yet again shitting the bed. Pascal Wehrlein, who had replaced Felipe Nasr at the start of the season, would score 5 points in the first half of the season, with an 8th place that could have been a 7th if not for a penalty in the Spanish Grand Prix, and a 10th place at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. These would sadly end up being the only points that Sauber would score that season, but they were at least ahead of McLaren right up until the Hungarian Grand Prix, when McLaren finally got their act together and started, producing results. With McLaren having a much better second half of the season, Sauber once again fell to 10th and last place in the Constructors' Championship, this time with no manner to prop up the tables. The Sauber C36 may have been slow, but at least it looked good doing it, decked out in a resplendent blue and gold and white livery in recognition of the team's 25th year in Formula One. The C36 is also notable for other reasons. This is to date the last Formula One car to use an older specification engine than the current season, and Pascal Wehrlein's C36 would receive an unexpected amount of TV attention when Wehrlein provided an impromptu taxi service to stricken Ferrari driver Sebastian Vettel after Vettel's Ferrari was punted off the road by Lance Stroll during the post-race cool-down lap. This must have pissed off Sauber management so much that they dropped Pascal Wehrlein for Charles Leclerc for the 2018 season, instead of, doing the logical thing and getting rid of Marcus Ericsson. Sauber's 2018 car, the C37, could have been very different from the one we actually got. Midway through 2017, Sauber negotiated a Honda engine supply deal for 2018, but this would eventually be cancelled in favour of strengthening Ferrari relations and taking on an Alfa Romeo title sponsorship. Ferrari wanted their promising rookie Charles Leclerc in the sport, and Sauber was willing to do it. And so they did, dropping Pascal Wehrlein for Leclerc, who proved to be a very good driver, as he would go on to score the majority of the team's points that season. Speaking of which, the C37 was actually designed with the aid of the wind tunnel again, as the team could once again afford to run it. This provided a much needed boost in performance, and as such the team was able to score 48 points across the season, enough for 8th place in the Constructors' Championship. A welcomed result after spending 3 of the last 4 seasons finishing 10th place. The car was so good, in fact, that Ericsson was actually able to score 9 points of his own, starting with a 9th place at the second round in Bahrain, the first points he had scored since Italy in 2015. However, the writing was finally on the wall for Ericsson's Formula One career, and he would finally be ejected from the team at the end of the season in favour of Kimi Räikkönen, who would return to the team after a single-season stint in 2001. Ericsson would go on to IndyCar, where, if we're being honest, he didn't do too badly whilst he was with Chip Ganassi, even managing to win the Indy 500, but since he joined Andretti, he's been pretty crap again, so, the more things change, the more things stay the same. Leclerc, on the other hand, impressed so much that he would be promoted to Ferrari for 2019, and Sauber would replace him with another Ferrari junior, Antonio Giovinazzi, and the Alfa Romeo title sponsor would evolve into full-on team rebranding as Alfa Romeo F1 team. 2019 would mark the first time since 1985 that an Alfa Romeo badged Formula One car would be on the grid. However, that was as a factory Alfa Romeo effort, whilst in 2019 it was Sauber engineered and thus retained the Sauber chassis designation C38. The C38 would be driven by Italian rookie Antonio Giovinazzi and the experienced Finnish world champion Kimi Raikkonen, who had last driven for the team in his rookie season in 2001. The C38 proved to be a fairly consistent point scorer, at least in the hands of Raikkonen. In the first half of the season before the summer break, Raikkonen would score all but one of the team's points. However, after the summer break, points became harder to come by for the team, as they had been outdeveloped by their competitors. And what had once been a promising start to the season crumbled at the German Grand Prix when both cars received hefty 30-second penalties for the use of illegal driver aids. Following the summer break, Giovinazzi would score an additional 3 points, whilst Raikkonen would go on an 8-race pointless streak. The highlight of the team's season came at the penultimate round in Brazil, as the team would score their best result of the season with 4th and 5th, leaving the weekend with 22 points to their name, an excellent effort from what had been a race of high attrition. With the team not scoring again in the final round of the season, this result solidified them in P8 in the World Constructors' Championship, with 57 points to their name. Had their German Grand Prix results not been penalised, Alfa Romeo Sauber would have had 67 points instead, putting them within touching distance of 7th place Racing Point. Alas, even if they had retained these points, it wouldn't have been enough, as the drop-off in performance after the summer break prevented them from going any higher. And perhaps this drop-off in performance was a sign of things to come. For the 2020 Formula One season, Alfa Romeo Sauber retained their 2019 driver lineup of Kimi Raikkonen and Antonio Giovinazzi to drive the brand new C39 to what would hopefully be championship glory. Though, let's be fair, they were never in contention for championship glory, especially when their engine suppliers Ferrari were hit with unspecified sanctions following some shenanigans in 2019. Whilst the nature of the sanctions were never specified, one thing is certain: the Ferrari engines in 2020 seemed a lot more underpowered compared to the previous season, and this bit not just Ferrari themselves, but their two customer teams, Haas and Alfa Romeo Sauber, and their results suffered greatly. Alfa Romeo Sauber went from scoring 57 points in 2019 to just 8 in 2020, and that's even accounting for the COVID-shortened 2020 calendar, which was only 17 races long. The subpar chassis, coupled with what was now a subpar engine, led to an underpowered, draggy, overweight mess of a car. A car that could, in the end, only manage a best finish of 3 9th places, 2 by Raikkonen and 1 at the hands of Giovinazzi. The team's best result would come at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix in Imola, where the team would score their only double points finish of the season with 9th and 10th, and this would be the last time they scored points that season. Despite earning these 8 points, the C39 didn't really earn these points on merit, as on each occasion that it scored points, The races in question had high attrition rates, meaning the points it picked up were mere happenstance. For a true indicator of the C39's pace, just look at the Italian Grand Prix, where following the restart they were running in 3rd and 4th, only to fall to 13th and 16th by the end of the race. With the ground effect regulations delayed until 2022, Sauber was forced to adapt the C39 for another year of competition, redesignating the altered car as C41, as the designation C40 was in use for the then in development ground effect car. The team would retain their driver lineup of Kimi Räikkönen and Antonio Giovinazzi, though Räikkönen would be replaced for 2 rounds by the team's reserve driver Robert Kubica, after Kimi was taken ill with COVID. Alfa Romeo Sauber would yet again be uncompetitive, as they were in 2020. Whilst there was some improvement in pace due to the usage of development tokens on the nose of the car and the improved 2021 specification Ferrari engine, it wasn't much help. Most of the time the car was finishing just outside of the points, and on the rare occasions that it did finish inside the points, the best it could manage was P8, twice at the hands of Räikkönen. Giovinazzi meanwhile could only manage a best finish of 9th at the penultimate round in Saudi Arabia. Whilst Alfa Romeo Sauber would go on to score 13 points across 2021, 5 points more than they achieved in 2020, they would end up being outscored by Williams, of all teams, who made quite a comeback to have their best season in several years, scoring a half-point podium, among other things. As such, Alfa Romeo Sauber outscored only Haas in the World Constructors' Championship, meaning they finished a paltry 9th overall. Giovinazzi would only contribute 3 of those 13 points, all but sealing his fate with the team and ensuring he would be replaced for the following season. As for Räikkönen, he would call time on his 20-year career and retire from Formula One at the end of the season. As luck would have it, both drivers' Formula One careers would end rather ignominiously, with the team suffering a double DNF at the season finale in Abu Dhabi. And that right there just about sums up their season. For 2022, Alfa Romeo Sauber redesignated the C40 as the C42. The new ground effect car would be driven by Chinese rookie Zhou Guanyu, and the team would replace one flying fin with another, the outgoing Kimi Räikkönen being replaced by Valtteri Bottas. Years of hard development work appeared to pay off, as the team would score an excellent double points finish in the opening round in Bahrain, with Bottas leading home Zhou in 6th and 10th respectively. More points would follow, with Bottas scoring 5 more times in the next 8 rounds, whilst Zhou would fail to score until the team's next double points finish at the Canadian Grand Prix, with 7th and 8th going to Bottas and Zhou respectively. Zhou's 7-race pointless streak was mainly due to the fact that the car was proven to be somewhat unreliable, with 3 of those races ending with mechanical failure. Another race would be ruined by a collision with Pierre Gasly, and at the Monaco Grand Prix, Zhou would qualify dead last. Zhou's lack of experience showed throughout the season, as he would only manage to score 3 times across the season, his 8th place finish in Canada being his best. Bottas, on the other hand, would take the car's best overall race finish with a P5 at the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. Following the double points finish in Canada, the car's competitiveness simply vanished. What had once been a solid midfield car was suddenly not scoring at all. Bottas would score just 2 more times after the Canadian Grand Prix, at the Mexico City and Sao Paulo Grand Prix, with Guan Yu Zhou managing just a single 10th place at the Italian Grand Prix. This sudden drop in performance put the team under threat from a resurgent Aston Martin, who were recovering from a poor start to the season themselves. But the 3 points that Bottas scored at the Mexico City and Sao Paulo Grand Prix proved to be just enough to keep Alfa Romeo in 6th place in the Constructors' Championship with 55 points, level with Aston Martin, but ahead by virtue of that 5th place finish at Imola. It had been hoped that Alfa Romeo Sauber's drop in performance in the second half of the 2022 season was just a blip, that something had gone wrong and they would be fixing everything for 2023. That was not the case. The Alfa Romeo Sauber C43 would see the team slip back to their 2021 standards of pace. It was like a cursed return to form of sorts, with the team scoring just 16 points across the 22 rounds of the 2023 season, just 3 more than what they achieved in 2021. It was very clear that the development of the car had gone very, very wrong, and the team had also lost its team principal Fred Vasseur to Ferrari, one of the main driving forces behind the team, who had been responsible for bringing Bottas on board. The pace of the C43 was simply inconsistent, and whilst the season started fairly decently, with Bottas scoring P8 at the season opening, points would be much harder to come by for the team as a whole, with Zhou Guanyu scoring just 3 times across the season with a trio of 9th places, whilst Bottas would score just 2 10th places and another 8th place as the season went on. The team's best result would come at the Qatar Grand Prix, with Bottas finishing ahead of Zhou in 8th and 9th respectively. If not for those 6 points that they scored that weekend, Alfa Romeo Sauber would have finished 10th and last in the championship again, and for the first time since 2017. It would have been quite the ignominious way for the Alfa Romeo name to leave the sport, as this would be the final Sauber-engineered car to bear the Alfa Romeo mark. Midway through the 2022 season, Sauber Motorsport would have a majority stake purchased by German car manufacturer Audi, which would eventually evolve into a full purchase of the team. With the German marque taking full control over Sauber, the Alfa Romeo name had to go. But with Audi planning to join the sport properly in 2026, that saw the Sauber team transition back to its original name of Sauber. Officially called Stake F1 Team Kick Sauber, Sauber would introduce the black and neon green C44 for the 2024 Formula One season. Unfortunately for the team, returning to their original name did not bring good performance, as this would prove to be the worst season for the team in 8 years, a performance that their then future Audi bosses called unacceptably poor, and for good reason. The car was flawed from the get-go, not just aerodynamically, but in its fundamental design as well. The car's early season was plagued with issues related to new lightweight wheel nuts that had a tendency to cross-thread, forcing mechanics at the pit stops to be extremely careful with how they used the wheel guns whilst changing wheels, meaning that pit stops for the Sauber team could often be as long as 50 seconds. Whilst this issue was eventually rectified, issues behind the scenes led to development of the car taking a bit of a back seat, as team principal Andreas Seidel, who had only been with the team for 2 years, was booted off and replaced by former Ferrari team principal Mattia Binotto. And it would take more than half of the season for any meaningful upgrades to be applied to the car. It would take until the penultimate round in Qatar for the car to actually be anywhere near competitive, when Zhou Guanyu finally scored the car's first and only points of the season, finishing P8, enough for 4 points, meaning they would finish the championship dead last in 10th. The C44 was comfortably the worst car of 2024, because even Alpine had managed to score points with their dog of a car. When the season finally came to its end in Abu Dhabi, Zhou Guanyu would leave the team to become Ferrari reserve driver, whilst Valtteri Bottas would wash his hands of the team and depart for a year sabbatical after having his first ever pointless season. Sauber would take on a brand new driver lineup for the 2025 season. Nico Hülkenberg would return to the team after 12 years, whilst the team would also take on Brazilian, rookie and reigning Formula 2 champion Gabriel Bortoleto. The Sauber C45 was an evolution of the C44, being that this was the last season of the 2022 ground effect regulations, and the car seemed to keep some of the C44's inherent lack of pace, though they would actually score 7th place at the season opening round in Australia, earning themselves more points than they had in 2024 with just a single result, and briefly putting them ahead of Ferrari in the Constructors' Championship. The car wouldn't score again until the Spanish Grand Prix, 8 rounds later, after the team brought a floor upgrade to the car that massively improved the car's performance, and Nico Hülkenberg would score an excellent 5th place. 2 rounds later, Bortoleto would score his first points of his Formula One career at the Austrian Grand Prix, finishing P8 ahead of his more experienced teammate. The car went on to be a semi-regular point scorer as the season went on, with the team eventually picking up an incredible 70 points, the most amount of points they had achieved since 2012. And yet, despite scoring all these points, it was still only enough for 9th place in the Constructors' Championship. That's just how closely matched the 2025 grid was. Sauber would finish 9 points adrift of 8th placed Haas, and just 22 points behind 6th placed Racing Bulls. It's surely a bittersweet ending to the Sauber name. But there was one moment of pure euphoria that the Sauber team experienced in their final year at Sauber, when Nico Hülkenberg finally managed to achieve his first ever podium finish after 239 race starts. The Sauber name has now finally left motorsport, but the team lives on as Audi.